the Feast of All Saints. The other day, I was reading a commentary on the Feast of All Saints, which referred to the saints as, and I quote, fragments of the face of God. Fragments of the face of God. How absolutely lovely. I look around here and on the screen, and I see such fragments all around, because there is a sense in which that is true of each and every one of us. We are, all of us, each and every one, created in the image and likeness of the Creator. And we all bear the stamp of the beauty and the diversity of the divine. You are fragments of the face of God. I think it's very telling that in the earliest days of the Christian community, they actually referred to one another as saints. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he tells them that he is leaving them, and I quote, he's going to minister to the saints that are in Jerusalem. But today, in the Feast of All Saints, we celebrate especially those who shine out in a special way as exemplars of people whose lives we can recognize as reflecting the fragments of the face of Jesus. The Feast of All Saints is a day when we honor the memory and also the presence among us of a great host of people, most of whom remain anonymous, but all of whom are held in the loving embrace of God. Saints, as I read in an article recently, saints are not church appointed, but spirit anointed. So we remember the people whom we have personally known and loved as saints in our own personal lives. The people who have nourished us and supported us in many different ways, and who may have helped us get through the rough times in our lives. Because you see, being holy doesn't mean rejecting everyday life in this world. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As the first reading for today points out, wisdom is a spirit that is intelligent, holy, manifold, subtle, overseeing all, and penetrating through all spirits that are intelligent and pure. This is the same Spirit of God, named now in feminine form as wisdom or Sophia, that moved over the waters of creation in Genesis 1 and brought forth all of the life in the universe. The book of wisdom from which this quote is taken actually comes from a series of writings that appear late in the Hebrew scriptures, with elements of influence from Greek thought. And the word for wisdom in Greek is Sophia. Hence, we get the great temple that is in Istanbul, or what used to be Constantinople, called Hagia Sophia, the place of holy wisdom. Malcolm Guite's poem puts it so beautifully. He writes, "The spirit of Sophia wisdom is my ground of being, always grounding me. It's interesting that the medieval mystic, Meister Eckhart, referred to God as the ground of all being. And I think today, with all the wonderful discoveries that we are making through space and everything else, when the huge revelation of the glory of the heavens is appearing on the screens of the James Webb Telescope, that we can still say that at the ground of all of this being is the Spirit of holy wisdom, who comes into all of us and inspires the saints and prophets in every age. Come, hidden wisdom, writes the poet. Come with all you bring. Come to me now, disguised as everything. And we read in the other, again, in the first reading, that in every generation, holy wisdom passes into holy souls and makes them friends of God and prophets. So how do we recognize these friends of God and prophets among us? Well, in today's gospel, Jesus has given us the template. Jesus' teaching that has come down to us now, known as the Beatitudes, outlines the ways we can recognize the creative energy of God in the world, working in all of those who are around us. To me, the Beatitudes represent the very essence of living as a follower of Jesus, a distilled essence of the whole gospel, if you like. And so I thought today I might highlight a few examples of people in the global community of today who, to my mind, are living in this essence of being a follower of God's light. Let's start with that one that says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Now, I don't think that Luke intended by writing, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," to get out of the demands of actual material poverty. But then neither do I think that there's anything exalted about poverty in and of itself. I think what Jesus was referring to when he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," was what we would call today living a sustainable life. The poor in spirit among us are those people who live with the intent to practice justice and sustainability in all their choices, especially their economic choices. They're the people who stop before they make a purchase to take account of the origins of the goods they purchase. Am I going to buy something that is the product of unjust labor practices or of environmental depredation or of cruelty to God's beloved animals? These are people who live simply, as the saying goes, so that others can simply live. Their way of life is a real and intentional challenge to the consumerist culture that is all around us. And blessed are those who mourn. I think of the families of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, those red dresses that have been displayed on trees, waving in the wind like tragic memorials of the flesh and blood that used to inhabit them. In Canada, the simple fact that you are an Indigenous woman or girl means that you are at least 3 times more likely to experience violence and at least 6 times more likely to be murdered than any other woman or girl in Canada. I think too of those who mourn the graves of the little Indigenous children who were tortured and starved at residential schools in Canada. So we mourn, but as the saying also goes, first we mourn, but then we work for change. And finally, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I'm thinking today of all the youth who have traveled to this week's COP27 conference in Egypt, still bearing within themselves that hunger and thirst of the generation that will inherit the earth that we have devastated. I think of the women of Iran who have taken to the streets at great risk to their personal safety to demonstrate against the abhorrent misogyny practiced under the rule of the Ayatollahs. Sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini, who was jailed and later killed for having a lock of hair out of place beneath her hijab. These women and children and their men supporters have risked their lives and taken to the streets while throwing off their hijabs, which in their context have come to represent oppression. A blessed and dangerous hunger and thirst for justice. So these are just some of my thoughts on living the Beatitudes today, and people who, to my mind, are an example of living that way of life. But the living community of the church here and now at Holy Trinity is celebrating the life-giving presence of those who have nourished the life of this community. So I invite you now to take a couple of minutes of silent reflection. Then, if you wish, come to the mic or put up your hand if you're online. If you want to share any of your thoughts about who the Spirit-anointed people among us are today or in the past.